Cool. So we are here today because recently Mark and I had Annalie Scopazzi on our podcast, Super Insider, and we talked about we did this like really interesting deep dive into the current hiring and recruiting dynamics of this job market, which is a very strange job market historically. And there was a very specific moment in our conversation that kind of triggered Mark and I to want to go a little bit deeper with Annalie on one part of what we talked about, which was something that really blew my mind, Annalie, when you mentioned that when recruiters offer to do prep calls with candidates, many of them actually don't take up recruiters on that offer. And given everything Mark and I have been learning, putting together the insider loops guides about how the interview process works at companies like Figma and Stripe and DoorDash and Uber. And one of the common themes of what we gathered from like successful candidates was the way that they leveraged recruiters and how highly they spoke of recruiters. It does seem like there's a huge mismatch between what people are actually doing and what successful candidates are doing when it comes to leveraging recruiters. So we wanted to go a little bit deeper with you, and you currently work mainly with, I think you mostly think of them as like early stage startup, Series A to Series D, to help them grow their talent teams, but have plenty of experience in larger companies too, scaling talent teams and recruiting teams at Palantir, Figma, and Notion. So you're probably one of the most plugged in people I know into the current kind of like hiring world, and that's why I was really excited to have you on.
I'm so excited too.
Is there anything that made you excited to go deeper on this beyond what I've already shared, and then we can kind of get into the session?
I think I just really feel for candidates in general because it's such a competitive market. If it wasn't already before, now it's incredibly competitive with AI, and we went into detail in that on the podcast of why that might be happening. And then later, when you had posted on LinkedIn about the conversation, one of the commenters had surfaced the reason that he doesn't take recruiters up on their offers is he's worried about presenting himself in a bad way that might get him filtered out, actually, and therefore why he wouldn't participate in that. And so I think that it could be helpful to candidates on average to understand what are the incentives of the recruiter, what is the purpose of the recruiter, what are they thinking on their side, and also what are the do's and don'ts to be successful through that.
Yeah, and I believe one of the things I saw in the comments, whether it was I forget which of our posts it was on too, but that there could be some cultural reasons that also people choose to not want to engage in recruiters. And I know sometimes it's even maybe some skepticism is baked into the culture, which is there's no chance this recruiter is going to say something helpful to me in this interview process because they're on one side of the table and I'm on the other side of the table. And in a high trust hiring market, which I would generally categorize like the U.S. hiring market, at least as like a high trust market, I think a lot of the times the candidate is on the same side of the table as the recruiter.
Yeah,
Nice.
I'd agree with
And it
that.
sounds like the person who commented is here.
Oh,
Amazing.
Hey,
amazing.
that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, hopefully by the end of this, you will let us know if we've made a compelling case for why for whether we've changed your mind or influenced your thinking in any way. That's a win.
I just want to say something while I'm thinking of it high level.
Yeah.
I do think that I could see a case for asking questions, how do I be successful, could be interpreted as, why do you need this help? Why don't you know how to answer the questions? Or maybe just a ding on the candidate. But I want to call out that specifically within tech, our tech culture and our fiercely competitive product culture is to collect so much feedback and talk to so many customers and talk to everyone that you're working with. So I think that in our culture specifically, it's really celebrated to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah. Totally. Cool. We're already getting into it, but before we do, it's just some housekeeping because I think, I'm not monitoring. Yeah, we got like almost 50 people here. So somewhere between intimate and too big to talk to everyone. But I would say first thing I want to say is that this is going to be recorded. Everyone's going to get the email afterwards. I think it's probably even better if people keep their video off during the session, just because I want everyone to kind of mostly listen, and then there's going to be plenty of time at the end for us to do Q&A. And we would prefer if the questions were held until the end, and then when the questions get posed, there's going to be a few minutes where people can drop their questions in the chat. If you see a question that you'd love for us to answer, you want to plus one it, feel free to react and plus one, and then we could make sure that we get to the most popular questions first. All right. So the things that we want to cover today with Annalie as our expert, and then Mark and I will follow our curiosity, ask some questions, double click into things that might be particularly interesting based on what we hear from candidates as well in the market. We're going to talk about how to understand the goals of recruiters when engaging with candidates, and of course, there's going to be a very like heavy U.S. hiring market lens that we probably apply to this because that's the market we spend basically all of our time thinking about. Um, and there's going to be some things we cover around really the recruiter screen, which is kind of like your first main point of contact with a recruiter when you get to know each other. For some people, that can be a really scary conversation because you can get weeded out there. But for other people, they treat it as a real chance to build a rapport and start building this relationship that will kind of carry them through the interview process. And then lastly, kind of advice that we might have for you on how you could partner with recruiters throughout that whole process, past that first screen. Does that basically hit the main points, Annalie and Mark, what we talked about?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think if we can hit all of that, it will be a home run.
Let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to stop screen sharing at this point, shift back into gallery mode. And so I think the place where I want to start with today, Annalie, is if someone is tuning in and they don't know any recruiters, they've never built a relationship with one of these recruiters. Most of their conversations with recruiters have just been as candidates. What do you think they should know about recruiter incentives? Like what's the recruiter's like main goal when engaging with candidates? Just love to see maybe how we can start the conversation there.
So recruiters, I would also call out, have two different buckets. So you have your internal recruiters, whether they be actually employees with the company or my company contracts with companies and acts as internal employees where you're paid for your time. And then you have another bucket of recruiters that are in agencies that are paid commission typically, and a lot of them aren't paid until the hire is actually made. And so, why there's a little bit of a nuance in this is that when you have an external agency partner, which I've worked in that type of agency, and I've also engaged hundreds through my experience at Palantir and Figma and through our clients today. And there is an average where you would see the external agencies being a little bit more 100% on your side with incentives, where they really want to make this money, they want to make the commission, and they will also submit you to many companies. They don't really care which company you land with. They would just really like to make that commission. And I'm saying that as someone who has done this. And internally, because you're going to be paid the same regardless, the incentives are you're still measured on your performance of how quickly can you make a quality hire, but also you typically are still there if it doesn't work out and the candidate quits. And so there's a little bit more filtering on having an opinion and filtering candidates out of the process. And so in that first recruiter call, let's stick with the internal recruiter experience because that's really, I think, where you need to be the most strategic. And so the thing to understand is that their incentives are aligned with you and they want to make this hire as fast as they can. And so they are incentivized to help you through this process quickly and sell you on the company if you're an interesting candidate. And then the nuance here is that it has to be with the candidate that is impressive to the hiring manager because ultimately the hiring manager is going to make the decision. And so the thing that's great about the recruiter is they've usually done so much work to understand the headspace of that hiring manager and what are their preferences and what are they looking for and what do they not like about people. And so they have that playbook at their disposal. And so I think when you talk to these recruiters, you should, one, treat them as a friend and build rapport with them and ask the questions that will give you an edge to be successful with the hiring manager, who's the decision maker in the end. But also understand they could pull it during the screen and reject you before you talk to the hiring manager. So there are some do's and don'ts in terms of what to say and not say to them.
Yeah, maybe let's go into that. Like, what are some things that really can get you, like just completely cut from the process in the recruiter screen, other than maybe you just don't have the right skill set or you just don't meet the qualifications. But yeah, what are some things that will get you disqualified at that stage?
So I think it's important to call out that it is nuanced with the company that you're interviewing with. And so every company, every hiring manager, every interviewer, and even every recruiter is going to have their own style, their own biases, their own preferences. And so I think the first thing to understand is there's a little bit of flexibility in this, and the way that you are able to adapt your style to whoever you're talking with is make sure that you leave lots of space to listen, actively listen. Try to see the trends in what they're asking about you that might indicate what's important to them. Look at how are they framing their own responses? What can you tell what they prioritize? And so I think also it's important before you talk to any interviewer to review their profile on LinkedIn and try to detect what is their experiences, anything you know about the places that they've worked, because if they've worked with Meta for the last 10 years, there's a lot you could research to understand what they value and what their experience would have been, versus someone that's been exclusively in startups, or a balance of those two. And so you're trying to predict what is important to them and what is their style also. And so in sales, there is this strategy called mirroring that is kind of weird, but it actually works, where you're seeing like if this person speaks a little bit more slowly versus a little bit more quickly versus a little bit more aggressively versus a little bit more not. If you just slightly modify your presentation to map to that and make them feel more comfortable, I do think that PMs are a little bit better than this than your average candidate, because a lot of their job is influencing other teams like engineers and designers. And those populations on average can have very different personalities, right? And so you're catering your approach not to change your whole personality, but just to really communicate and resonate with the person that you're talking with. So that's the first thing to know. But there are some things that are absolutely interesting to all companies and absolutely not to all companies. Maybe there's like a very tiny, tiny exception, but probably 99% of them. So, for example, like that active listening part is a really must do. And in the PM population specifically, more so than any other population, I can see PMs get very long-winded. And so you ask them a question about, tell me about this project, and then they run and run and run and run. And then you kind of ran out of time in the interview. And what sucks for that moment is the recruiter might have specific things that they're looking for. And I think it's important to pause when you're talking and let them drive the conversation. And also, guys, I would encourage you to interrupt me and ask me clarifying questions, because I'm at risk right now of trying to share my whole brain and being very long-winded. I want to make sure that you're getting exactly what you want out of this conversation. And so recruiters need to be really active in this conversation and just like course correct and say, hey, I really want to dig more into that, because that's actually what
Yeah. I think it's a strategy that I use a lot in my interview coaching. It's called waypointing, and waypointing is basically indicating, like explicitly calling out where you are in the conversation and where you think you can go next, but checking in with the other person to make sure they also want to go there next. And I think that's a way of kind of de-risking the chance that you go on a tangent that is not interesting and then run out of time before you cover the stuff that they actually do care about. In the spirit of double clicking and just kind of clarifying something, the one question I had so far, based on what I'm hearing from you, is like, look up the recruiter before so you know who you're talking to. If a recruiter sees that a candidate, let's say an hour before the recruiter screen, looked at their LinkedIn and they just see that, can you just like talk through what's going through the head of a recruiter if they see that, like a candidate, this candidate viewed your profile on LinkedIn?
I never see that. I also have who I looked at not turned on, but I would only imagine it would be seen as a positive. Like we're expecting people to do their homework, and the ones that really care about the process are going to do that.
Makes sense. Story that I tell myself for the recruiter screen is that there's almost like three potential outcomes. One is like, okay, like you bomb it, or you just maybe find out, hey, I'm not the right fit for this. So you kind of like, you leave the process because there's a mismatch there. But in my opinion, where there is the biggest leverage is taking from a recruiter screener from neutral of like, this person is good, I'm going to move into the next stage, to like, hey, I love this person and I want to see them succeed, right? Like I want to help them. And I think they're great, and I want to, not bet the house, but put a lot of my energy into this candidate. Like, I'm curious, like, from you, when you decide to like, hey, I'm gonna bet on this person on the ladder. Like, I'm really excited about this person. Like, what do they do maybe in the recruiter screen for you to feel like, hey, this is going to be a good use of my time to continue to help this person and make sure that they succeed in every step along the way?
So one, do your homework. So it's not just review the LinkedIn profile, it's review the website, it's review the job description, it's review any recent online content, whether this is an article, a press release, a LinkedIn post from the recruiter, the hiring manager, or the CEO. So all those as your baseline. If you're working with a startup, reviewing the Crunchbase for their funding details, their investors, the total raised, and the timing of that. And so the recruiter will sometimes run into conversations where the candidate knows nothing about the company, and it starts to become, well, why are you interested? And all these other people are super interested. And so it's an easy thing to just kind of disengage in those moments. So first of all, just show that you have a baseline understanding. And so you can speak compellingly to specifically why this is interesting. And by the way, I'm not reading these comments. I'm seeing them pop up. So if there's anything I should address, please interrupt me. And so first of all is just do your homework. Second of all, I would say is just be kind. I think that there's a very rare culture where being an asshole is cool, but I would say almost every company doesn't want to work with assholes. And so it's kind of weird to say that sometimes it might come up in an interview environment, but it does. And so just generally be someone who's kind. I think that where maybe there's a little bit of confusion is that there's certain, say, like at MBA schools we've heard of in the past that have encouraged people to speak super confidently, if not overconfidently, and kind of manifest their destiny by just being really overt and confident. And I think that every company appreciates confidence, actually. But it needs to be tempered by awareness of what you don't know and what are your weaknesses. Because at the end of the day, they're looking to entrust you with responsibility and the outcome and the shape of this product. And if you just run blindly and don't know what you're doing, that is a huge risk to the company. And so you want to come in with confidence. If they ask you a question you don't know, do not bullshit. Do say, well, this is my understanding and this is what I would do to solve the problem to understand it better. And you want to still continue to express confidence in your ability to go research and figure it out. So be confident, but also be kind. And then I think being a little bit personal is a very US thing. It's like something I have seen less common in other countries where maybe are a little bit more professional and buttoned up between their personal lives and their professional lives. And I would say that on average, most companies really appreciate being human and just sharing a little bit about your personality. So it makes it easier for the recruiter, who is on average a person who's very relationship focused, to connect with.
Yeah, one thing I sometimes hear from candidates who I talk to is they view the recruiter screen as like a checking the boxes exercise that kind of is, it's not, they don't take it, I think, with the same level of um
Rigor.
rigor, yeah, and preparation that they take like a hiring manager call, for example. What would you say to the people that view a recruiter screen as like a checking the boxes exercise?
I think if your experience is perfectly aligned, that recruiter, unless if you say something really offensive, is going to pass you forward. But it does risk the opportunity for that recruiter to champion for you, because the recruiter is in these debriefs with the hiring managers. They are driving process for all of the competitive candidates to you. And they have a real inside scoop on all of this. And it is their job to guide you through the process. So if there's a candidate that treated it more thoughtfully and who connected with them better and who's taking them up on the calls in between during the process, they might have an advantage because that recruiter is sharing more inside information with them.
Mm.
My perspective here too, and I'm curious if this resonates with both of you, is that the recruiter screen is also where you can get a lot of leverage to is like the questions that you save at the end, not just about like maybe information about the company that you couldn't find online and that might be useful for you to know, and that also shows it's another opportunity for you to show back to your first point of how prepared you are and how seriously you're taking this, which can signal that's going to be a reflection of how seriously you're going to take the rest of the process. And therefore, it's going to make the recruiter comfortable. Hey, this person is actually pretty serious and they're going to do well. That's one. But the other one is like, again, like you have visibility into all the steps of the recruiting process, right? So it's a great opportunity for you to ask questions about like, hey, like, can you tell me like what the candidates that are doing really well have in common? Or maybe what are some things that people have, maybe a misstep that people have taken that has led to them maybe getting cut in some parts of the interview. So I think that kind of coming prepared with that and can help you with get a little bit more alpha than maybe people that don't have good questions would get.
Yeah, I would respond really well to any of those questions. Like it
Are
definitely
there
and
are
maybe
there recruiters who wouldn't?
I think you have to be careful that you can't, there's no 100% answer for anything, right? But I think that what you're demonstrating in those questions is that you really care, and that is always going to be appreciated. And also framing it as, like, how do I best prepare myself because I'm really interested? What you don't want to do is maybe feel like you are going to be inauthentic through any part of this process. And the way that you can demonstrate that you're not going to be inauthentic is just by being real in some moments. And so when you have an opportunity to say, "Hey, that's actually less something I'm less familiar with," just say that, and it actually builds credibility with them.
Yeah, the other way I see it too is if you're asking those questions to the recruiter, you're asking for their opinion. It also makes them feel more valued, right? Because like, hey, like I know you're an expert here, and I want to hear what you have to say, right? And I think making them feel special and be like, hey, like I actually really care about your point of view, not like maybe the hiring managers or whatever. Like I think that also can be have a good like back to like, hey, I like this person. They care about what I think. I think that's also a big psychological win there too.
Yeah, and I think just generally being respectful is what it is. It's like we don't need a huge ego boost, but we do appreciate appreciation. But then there's also just like being respectful of respond to their emails promptly, show up on time, don't no show.
So earlier I think Mark we started with like the almost like the do's and the don'ts of the recruiter screen. Are there any other before we kind of maybe move forward in the process? Any other do's and don'ts that come out to you, Annalie, for the recruiter screen that people should definitely know?
I'm trying to think if there's any absolutely don't do's. So it's don't be rude, show up on time, be respectful. Do give pause so that they can interject. Do ask for preparation. I would say that you would like, and that's the moment to request an overview of the interview process. And that is also the moment to request more detail on your next step. So don't take over their whole time or schedule an additional call to go into detail on every step, but get a quick overview. Who am I talking to? How long is that duration? What topics might be covered? Actually, what topics might be covered is a little bit more detailed. So save that more for the next conversation and say, "Hey, who am I talking to? What is the typical agenda? And do you have any tips for how I can be successful in that?" So use that moment to prepare and ask questions about the specific of your next round. To save them another call, the recruiter doesn't want to schedule another prep call before the call, but they will want to schedule a prep call before the onsite on average.
One thing that we haven't covered is compensation questions in the recruiter screen. And I know some companies do that on the recruiter screen, some others maybe even do a pre-filter or because maybe they even have like the range. So yeah, any thoughts how you can maybe answer that compensation question in a way that can hurt you or in a way that can be helpful based on your experience?
So if you're in California and New York, I'm not sure if other states by now, there is an obligation of the company to be transparent about the compensation range. And so you should feel comfortable in any state asking what is the range, what is the budget for this? And the recruiter won't take it personally or think it's a weird question. That is obviously something you're going to be considering if you're going to accept this job or not. And a really good recruiter wants to get ahead of all that. And so I think where I've seen a lot of candidates just not entire. So one other thing for context is that the range is based on a couple different levers of how much experience do you have relative to the range they're considering. So if you are on the lower end of range on the years of experience, they typically won't pay you the top of the budget. And so a lot of recruiters are not really thrilled about sharing the range because the second you throw out the high number, that's what candidates will often index on and get disappointed if they don't get the top of the range. And so the thing to know is that they are a little bit cautious around that discussion and hopefully are explaining what's the range of years they're experiencing, and then also how you do in the interview performance. So is this going to be someone that absolutely crushes it and is completely self-autonomous as soon as they start on day one? Or is this someone that we're going to need to lean in more, teach them more things and ramp them up, and they're going to level you within more the mid-range of that leveling? So that's a very delicate conversation. And as a result, I think that if there are real concrete expectations that you have, it's best to represent those. Don't waste your time and don't waste their time. If your household budget says you absolutely need to make this much, but similarly, I can understand that you also don't want to throw out a number that ends up being low and they would have paid you more had you not cited that number. And so I think where I see a lot of candidates being successful in a negotiation is they may play it looser at the beginning and make it more of a discovery conversation and say, okay, can you share with me what's the range and how do you level people within that range? And what is the weight between salary versus equity, for example? And within a public company versus a startup, that equity piece has a lot of difference in its value, right? Where the startup is a lot more risky and hard to measure. So I see candidates often will say, I'm open. I'd like to see this process through. What can you share with me about the range? And then you can reflect internally if that meets your range and you can withdraw from the process if it doesn't. But maybe refrain from stating your number unless if it's, it's just wildly out from what they would offer.
Yeah, and I know it's not, I think is it illegal across all states at this point, Annalie, for the interviewer to ask the candidate how much they make in their current role?
I can't say confidently if it's illegal across all states, but I've been operating as if I can't ask that question.
Yeah, and I think some people um, will volunteer that information if they think it's helpful to them. But what would you say to someone who thinks that like, if they think they're well compensated and they want to make sure they basically think they're being paid at top of market, should they? Do you think it's advantageous at all to a candidate to mention their current compensation proactively to a recruiter to like let them know, here's where I'm at, and I don't want to take a pay cut for my next gig?
Yes. So if you suspect you are under market, definitely Google to see what your rights are and whether you are protected from sharing that information. And you can't even say, I would prefer not to share that information if someone just directly asks you. But I do think that if you suspect you're paid above average on the market and maybe you're even in a big public company and going to a startup and open to taking a hit, it will bring some leverage to you if you say, here's what I'm currently making.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're almost anchoring on the other direction in a way that will be favorable to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it's a number,
Cool.
and if you are genuinely okay with taking a hit and your number is outrageous, you can say, this is my number. I understand startups pay less than big companies, for example. So I'm open to continuing this discussion. And yeah, go with that.
And then one of the things I think, the last thing I think you'd suggest based on our previous conversation to candidates starting in that recruiter screen, curious if you think this is true. You recommend before hanging up with a recruiter, asking them some kind of question that's like, do you have any hesitations, or is there anything about my experience that you think would not make me the right fit for the role just based on this conversation? Do you recommend asking that at the end of the recruiter screen?
Yes, and again, I'll underscore there is a little bit of risk in this question. There are some people who are maybe less direct, but I've only had a good experience with that question personally. I think a softer way to frame it, Mark has shared his version of that. So what Ben is referencing is exactly a question I asked her in my Palantir interview process. What are your concerns about me, like that I can address? Mark framed it in his interview process more as what could I have done better in this interview process? And I think in either case, what works about it is we are in tech, we are gathering all this feedback, and I think it is very much in our culture to seek feedback.
Yeah.
And it gives you an opportunity to actually respond to their concerns in the moment before they reject you.
Yeah, I do want to call out that this is one of those things that culturally speaking, and maybe in European countries that might be a little bit different. Like it might be a sign of like maybe insecurity or so I think like I would just navigate that and your knowledge of the culture. As someone who grew up in Spain, I know like, or it might just make some people uncomfortable. But yeah, I mean, I think the other way to think about it is like, hey, like, you can also like make a frame of like, don't put the recruiter in this spot to be like, hey, based on your knowledge of the hiring team, what do you think will be some of the hesitations about, that they will have about my profile? And then it's less personal of like, hey, like you have to give me hard feedback in this spot, but it's more, no, like based on your knowledge, like we're on the same team. So let me know, like what are the things that you think will rise a red flag for the team? And I think that's a little bit like safer in a way too.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, so what happens after the recruiter screen? Okay, well, yeah, just like behind the scenes baseball, I guess. Like, so the recruiter hangs up with the candidate. What typically is like the first thing that they do after that?
Well, if they're a good recruiter, I wish all my recruiters did this, but submit their feedback in the system. So this is the one moment your recruiter is interviewing you. This is their moment to shine with the hiring team, and the hiring team is looking at their opinion. And we want everything recorded in the system, both for the recruiter and all subsequent interviewers. And so they are going to be more critical in that conversation, and they are going to weigh in on their opinion. And then just know going forward, I haven't seen a case where the recruiter is asked to formally submit feedback again and be a proper interview again. After that, it's a little bit more they turn into your guide through the process and a salesperson. So if the interview team is really liking you as a candidate, it's their job to close you at the end. And so it is a missed opportunity if you don't lay the foundation of having a relationship with that person. You want them to be championing you through the end. And so, but that is one nuanced thing to know, is that they're not going to be a formal interviewer going forward. And so you want to be more strategic in that first conversation. And then their job is then to schedule the next steps for you, to collect feedback from the interviewers, to help that interviewer decide if they're going to schedule another interview or not, or reject. And then also their incentive is to understand you and where else are you interviewing and what are you targeting and how is that evolving, and making sure you get through the process timely so they don't lose you if you're going to take another job.
Makes sense. And is that so yeah, it sounds okay. Like you put the recruiter puts the feedback on the ATS, and the recruiter, the hiring team is like, awesome, this person sounds great, and let's move forward with them. And then is the next steps for you usually like, let's try to find like 15 to 20 minutes with that candidate to just make sure that you have all the information that you need to make sure, or yeah, what happens next?
Not
Yeah.
yet. So typically the next round is going to be with a technical interviewer or someone on the team, I should say. And it can be different between big
This is
companies.
for PMs. I think we're mostly talking about PMs here, right?
Yeah, so when I say technical, I mean technical to product, not necessarily coding for engineering. And like same as a technical conversation with a recruiter would be with the recruiting team, and more specific about tactical things in your job and technologies. And it does look different between big companies and smaller companies, or how big even in smaller companies is this product team. And probably if it's a startup, they're quite small, but in a company that's public, it could be thousands. And so it could be the case that you're interviewing with someone that's not going to be on the team that you work on, versus in a smaller company, they would be on the team that you work on. And in the smallest company's case, maybe it's not even with a product person.
Could be
So
like the founder maybe, or
Yeah.
an engine, like the engineering
usually the
leader.
founder, unless if this is a seed company and they have no one. Usually we save the founders for the end of the process. But if this is their first PM hire, then it could be with the founder, I suppose, actually. But it could be with an
Could be
engineer.
a designer, like their design
Yeah,
partner,
just well,
or
so
yeah.
do they have a designer? Is the other question. But
Yeah.
so basically the
Whoever's
next
basically doing product at that point is in Mike's having been the first PM three times. It's usually basically like the whoever's doing the job you're coming in to do is in the neighborhood of who you talk to first, because it is
Yeah.
being done. The job is being done by somebody.
Right, exactly. And so there becomes a moment in scaling where it is this founder, or it's the VP of engineering, someone that has the time early on, but then scales to not having the time anymore. And they start to train their team members to take this first screen and save the hiring manager for after that. So it's not always the hiring manager on the second screen. But in any case, that's why I'm advocating that people ask more detailed questions to have the recruiter help them prepare for that next screen. You can also follow up over email with questions as well. But it's not really common for the recruiter to take a prep call in advance of the second call. That's just
Mm.
part of the normal filtering out process that they don't typically spend more time on. And So that screen is, there's a lot of work on that one screen in terms of measuring, are we asking the right questions? Do we have the right like assessment rubric? And because typically after that, you're going to see the on-site in the schedule where that is the biggest time investment on the team's end. We're meeting with multiple people and it's very expensive from a recruiting investment perspective. So there's a lot of work on this next screen. And what do you ask? And so that is something you want to ask the recruiter for help preparing for. Hopefully, you have enough time in the phone call and that they can succinctly capture it. And if not, you could maybe send them a note and just say, hey, just do you have any tips for preparing for this call or what you expect to be covered so I can prepare well? And you're always expressing it in terms of so I can prepare well because I'm very interested. And so the recruiter will schedule that call and then they don't typically have a ton of influence in the decision made from that call. But if you suspect that you answered a question imperfectly or you felt it wasn't comprehensive, or maybe you even got the answer wrong and afterwards you realized it, I have seen candidates email the recruiter and say, hey, just FYI, I think I botched that question. I've reflected and this is actually how I'd approach it. And the recruiter will forward it to the hiring manager so they can work for you to kind of clean up some of your misanswered questions.
Is there any reason why not to email the hiring manager or the interviewer directly as opposed to the recruiter? Is
I'm
it
saying
just
the recruiter because a lot of times you don't have the hiring manager's email address,
got
and
it?
the comms are centralized through the recruiter through this process. In a smaller company, you might have the hiring manager, in which case, I think I just defer to you on how you feel about that. If you felt like you had a really good rapport with that hiring manager, you have their email, go ahead, you know. But if for any
So
reason,
there's also some company culture elements, right? Where if a company maybe rewards scrappiness and resourcefulness, then maybe someone's ability to like put one and one together and kind of reverse engineer the hiring manager's email address by the structure of the email address of the recruiter, and then they just send them a note directly. That could show maybe a little bit of extra initiative.
Yeah.
But I can see how that can come off as
yeah,
maybe
I would
too.
personally just err on the side of caution this one. If you don't
Uh,
have their email, just email it to the recruiter because the recruiter will forward it.
mm,
Yeah. The reason why it's also safer to do the recruiter is because, if you're not able to read the culture of the company, like they might not be
they
open
can
to
be a
that or
buffer.
exactly. But then the recruiter, if you send a recruiter, they can actually make the call, be like, oh, thank you, but I don't know if we need like actually I saw the feedback, you crushed it. So actually like this might come off as like you're insecure or maybe you're not confident about the way you come things. So I think that's like
Mhm.
why it might just be like a nice filter that will maybe help you more than hurt you. So just to make things super clear. So it sounds like okay, like you pass the recruiter screen, and then the next step, PM loop is usually like one interview or two interviews, depending on the company. Like usually like a product sense, maybe like the hiring manager also will do a filtering before the onsite, given that the onsite is just super expensive. And it sounds like the regular almost checkpoint is like you either maybe really good recruiters will email you up front telling you, hey, here's how you prepare for the next round. But sometimes they won't do that. And then it's more kind of up to you to be like in the email, hey, like, very interested in this company. Any tips for preparing? I'm also sure that if you're a really good candidate too, you could even maybe get the recruiter to get on a phone call with you.
Before
But
the
then after,
on-site, I would advocate everybody ask for that call if it's not already offered. I
cool.
don't see any recruiter reacting poorly to that one. I mean, someone can call me out if I'm wrong, but I just think it shows interest in wanting to prepare and understanding that all teams are different and just wanting to go into the process with some foundational preparation. I think that's well respected. And they don't have to spend an hour on this phone call or even 30 minutes on this phone call. It could be just 10 minutes to help get you prepared.
I just this week had someone message me that they have a it's not a full onsite, but it's an hour long, live case interview. And they were given like a paragraph of expectations of what to expect. And they sent it to me and they're like, do you know what this means? And it was kind of ambiguous to me of what they can actually expect in that interview, like what the flow of it's going to be, what they're going to be asked, how they're going to be evaluated. So they followed up with the recruiter and they were like, they said they can literally tell me nothing more than this. Like they won't get on a call with me. They won't tell me anything more about what to expect. What's going on the other side? I mean, obviously you don't know the specifics of this company or who these people are, but like, what's a reason that could be happening?
So, company policy. is the bottom line of that. We see it come up more commonly when you're being rejected, of when a candidate's rejected, can you provide detailed feedback or any feedback? And some bigger companies will take, and maybe smaller companies with really conservative executives will take the position of just don't share anything because we don't want to be under litigation for any misunderstanding around this. And but I would imagine if they're also declining to prepare you, then maybe that's more of a strategic policy in terms of they just want to see who sinks and who swims. But I would
Mm.
say that that's probably rare.
So it's almost like part of what they're evaluating is your ability to come in not knowing exactly what's going to happen and then to sink or swim live.
Yes.
I don't know. I would personally, I mean, that's might be a hot take, but I would personally run away from from that situation. It's almost like, in
Yeah.
what environment do you want to work at a place where there's just ambiguity and you asking a good question to clarify and
They're just like,
kind of
no, sorry, can't help you.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, in a
Mhm.
way, right? Like it's like recruiting is like dating, right? Like you're trying to get a sense of, hey, can I work with this person? Is there a good fit here? And if that's what you're choosing to show up in that process, like I think it's like a red flag, unless they can justify it and be like, hey, here's why we're asking this, here's what we're trying to get signal on, and that's why I cannot change the information. But it's just literally like a blanket question. It's like, sorry, like it's like in their policies, like, okay, like I'm out.
Well, I
Maybe
completely
they're
agree.
filtering for people that thrive without being set up for success. People that just like literally are the right fit for
Yeah,
that. What were
but,
you going to
but
say,
but
Annalie?
then say that, right?
Yeah,
Well, so the only thing
true.
I will edit to what you said is ambiguous is the thing we test for all the time. Like, can you operate in a biggest environment where this you're building from 0 to 1? And companies, even big companies, will say that they're doing that. And so there is amount of testing around can you operate without like a ton of resources. But as a team member, you would hope that your team members are wanting to set you up for success and share any legacy information, anything that they've learned in the past from how to be successful in this ambiguous project. So there is a balance. They are testing you for ambiguity, but you're hoping that they're going to be a team player and try to help you to what extent that they can.
Trying to get access to the people that know the most about a topic is a very good like it's a very good tactic for dealing with ambiguity. Like if I was evaluating someone's
Yeah,
ability to deal with ambiguity, it's like wanting to get on that call is a great skill because you're literally demonstrating how you can disambiguate something, which is the job. So,
100%.
Yeah, the one thing that I want to kind of like make sure like to double emphasize is like, yeah, like get on that call like before the on-site, and like if you can't make it like 30 minutes, or like, because I think like from my experience like talking to different candidates, like it's kind of wild how much information some recruiters will share in that call. And there's some information that they will not share via email because they don't want to leave like a paper trail, right? But yeah, sometimes it's even better to do this via phone call too, because sometimes like now in the age of like everything is recorded, like a Zoom call might be recorded, etc. But what I've heard from a phone call is a bit safer, especially if you have their personal phone number. And
Mhm.
but literally, like I've heard like candidates from very prestigious companies where they literally just got every single question they were going to ask um, in the 4 or 5 on-sites that they were in, and there's some people that didn't take that call and they didn't know what questions they're going to ask. So like that's like really the difference between someone who is like leveraging the recruiter and someone who's not. And of course you still need to be good at like performing live and showing your critical thinking. But if you have the questions, like that's a huge advantage that maybe someone else doesn't.
Right.
yeah, I find it kind of interesting that there's like a spectrum from like how much a recruiter will share, which is nothing, all the way to the spectrum of like getting into the specific questions and even like the rubric that you're going to be evaluated on. So um, if you're a candidate, is the main advice be respectful, be excited, show up as wanting to be very prepared as possible, and kind of like don't hold back. What obviously like be thoughtful in how you present your questions, but like don't hold back from a content perspective of what you're trying to learn on that call with a recruiter, trying to get as much intel as possible, and let them be the ones that say I can't share that's something I can't share.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there would be a question that would resonate badly. I think the way that you de-risk this is being just more general about what are your tips for being successful through this interview process. how can I best set myself up for success because I'm super interested, and just tying it to that because I'm super interested would, I think, be a very neutral approach.
Yeah. One issue though that I see sometimes is like, because, I know this is maybe on the ethical border, but sometimes I get transcripts shared with me from candidates like screens with recruiters, and it's like everything under the moon is like what the recruiter tells them. Oh, you can't, great candidates do like this, and there's like a 50 things that like they do. And so I don't think like I'm sure some recruiters are really good at this and in communicating the just what you need to know and saying it in a way that resonates. But I think for a lot of candidates, it can feel kind of like a laundry list of like, oh my God, this is like an insane amount of expectations of what they're asking for. Um, so, I, is there anything that like, what's the right fidelity of what you've seen help the candidates the most? Like, if you're a recruiter listening to this, like, what's like the way to package the tips in a way that will be most helpful for a candidate?
Well, yeah, keeping it short might be preferable, something that somebody can digest and really focus on. I don't know, maybe it's actually really helpful to hear the full laundry list. But if that's really intimidating, the thing to understand is that people get jobs all the time or they don't check every single box. And I know we're in a really competitive industry where hiring managers are asking for more and more and more. But I think that there is a big indexing on this cultural fit and did you get along with the team and are you expressing a lot of interest and are you showing confidence tempered with some self-awareness that shows confidence in your ability to grow. Like there's those things they do let things shine really big in people's strengths that can um, maybe make the things that you don't have a little bit less important. And I'm speaking personally, every job I've ever had, I was not qualified for. And I know that women on average tend not to apply to jobs that they don't check every box, but people do get hired all the time for things they're not totally qualified for. So if the recruiter's giving you a laundry list, maybe focus on the things that you really do feel great about that you can showcase.
Cool. I know we're, man, almost at the hour mark. I cannot believe that. This is
Yeah,
flying
that flew
by.
by.
Um, do we have time to maybe cover post onsite, kind of leveraging recruiter?
Let's make
And
it
then,
quick so we can get some questions here. The only
cool.
thing
Okay. So,
to
yeah,
say is during the offer stages, this is the time you have your most leverage. So if you have any questions about the company that are maybe going to flag you as a not a fit, like maybe you're asking about work-life balance, save those types of questions for the end when you actually have leverage. And at that point, once you have an offer, it's very, very rare that you're going to get pulled out of the process. You have to say something super offensive or have a very bad reference to have that retracted from you. So save that for the end. Once you're an offer, the recruiter is totally incentivized to close you. So you're going to want to take advantage of the time to ask questions to make you get comfortable with the decision to join the company.
Sunk cost fallacy is real.
Yes.
yeah, but they've also just, I mean, it's not like the company has had so many opportunities at that point to say this person's not a good fit. And each time they've said they are a good fit, let's keep them moving. The reason this whole process is happening is because they want to hire someone. So like they want to get back to doing the job. They don't want to it's generally safe to assume they want to spend the minimal amount of time filling the role, right? Like the minimum without
Everyone
compromising their standards.
Everyone's excited when they're an offer.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to close it.
Yeah. Cool. Great. Okay, so let's and if people have questions that we haven't covered throughout this whole process, because we probably over-indexed a little bit on the earlier parts, because I do think that's actually where most people just run into recruiter conversations is the earlier parts. Feel free to drop those in the chat. I'm gonna shift us for a moment. So we're about to do Q&A. If while we're doing the next few minutes, you want to go ahead and follow Annalie. She's on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. Mark's on LinkedIn. You can go and follow us, get our content there, learn a bit more about what we work on. Annalie, you want to just tell our audience for a minute, just a bit about what's exciting to you these days running Boulevard?
Yeah, so we're a small firm of 30 people, 33 technically, and we started 6 years ago with one of our very first clients being Notion, scaling the company from 20 to 65 employees. And we've built out a really robust community of startups that we're supporting. So I'm really excited what we're doing. Definitely feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in startup jobs.
Amazing. Yep. And then, yeah, Mark, you want to say a little bit about Insider Loops?
Yeah. If you have a really good, if you get an interview at any of the companies in the slide, Stripe, Figma, Uber, DoorDash, Ben and I built something that I think could be really helpful for your process. We've talked to people, we talk to candidates all the time that have gone through the interviews, also hiring managers. So we just kind of give you a little bit of a guide of like, kind of maybe like 2 or 3 level deeper to what the recruiter might give you on, the questions that you might get asked, what they're looking for. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value there. So if you're interviewing at any of those companies, check it out. Anything you would add, Ben?
Insiderloops.com. Nope. I mean, I'm just super proud of it. I think we hold a really high quality bar for what we do these days, and these are things we're updating on sometimes weekly, but most of the time bi-weekly or monthly basis at this point based on insights. So I cannot think of anything that's a more recent, up-to-date way to know what to expect in these interviews than these guides we're creating. I also want to take a chance to plug something we don't yet have a guide for, which is meta interviews. So if you are getting ready for either meta interviews or meta style interviews, like you might encounter a product sense interview at Stripe, product sense interview at a company like DoorDash, which actually breaks it down into product prioritization and product sense, you can get ready for those kind of interviews with my Maven course, which I recently overhauled into a self-paced course that fits your timeline, because your timeline doesn't always fit my timeline. So you'll get over 30 hours of recordings, one-on-one access to me, and access to my interview practice copilot. If you enroll in that, and if you use Fast25, you can get 25% off until I think it's November 24th or 25th, one of those next few days. And Mark, why don't you tell people a little bit more also about Supra,
Yeah,
which is
so
how we met.
Yeah, that's how Ben and I met. That's how we started doing the podcast. Supra is a product community for product leaders. And the way I think about product leaders is either principal level PMs or people that are leading other PMs, like group PMs, directors, BPs of product. And yeah, the key feature is when you join, we match with a group of 7 other product leaders. And it's a great way to just bring your thorniest topics to that group and help you troubleshoot. The likelihood that someone in that group has solved that problem is quite high. And so it's really productive. And we also do in-person events. We have speakers. We also have a very engaged Slack community. So check us out.
Cool. Oh, I think I already did that. Are we going backwards at this point?
You are.
There we go. Okay, cool. All right, so Q&A, I'm going to stop
Are we able to
sharing.
go over time? I take it we might need to at this point.
I'm good. If people need to
Okay.
drop, they can drop, but how's your schedule, Mark?
Yeah, I can do probably 5, 10 over.
Cool. All right, so let's look at the chat. So I'm going to scroll up and see if we missed any questions so far.
I think Harsha's question is the one with the most votes, which is basically I see a lot of recruiter reviews on my LinkedIn profile, but not that many message for reach outs, or not that many do like an outreach for me. And I think the question here is like, what might be going on here? And is there any changes that I might be able to make to ensure that the number of recruiters that are reaching out to me goes up over time?
That's an interesting question because it's just so specific to each company. And so companies in product specifically might be targeting people with a certain years. So if the team is bigger, there might be a broader range of years of experience. But in startups, for example, where they're just hiring one, there might be a very specific range that they're targeting where it needs to be quite senior, but someone hasn't been in management for too long. So that's one factor that they're looking at. I don't know. I would actually have to just go look at your own profile. So if you don't mind shooting me an email, I'm happy to look at it and just give you some personal advice for that one.
Amazing.
Let's see. When you're okay. Yeah, there's a question around like how we define recruiters, and I think that can be a mix of it's a mixed bag of, recruiting agencies, headhunters, people who work at the companies doing outbound to people that fit the bill. Let's see what else. In the final round with decision makers. So yeah, maybe a question that I can ask that is probably one I've seen more generalizable to people is, as a recruiter sitting in on that final, let's say 3 candidates go through an on-site you're in the room debriefing, and they can only extend one offer, right? They're gonna figure out who they want. Maybe they have a number two that they'll extend an offer to if the number one doesn't accept. But um, anything you can share about what makes one person on the margin generally stick out as the person they want to give the offer to versus the other two, if we haven't already talked about it, beyond just like
And
fit, performance, and interviews.
yeah, so this is just kind of tough to say out loud, but I think it's who they get along with. I do. I think it's like they're trying to imagine working with this person for many hours every week. And so this is where there's an opportunity to introduce bias. And I hate that. And I think as recruiters, we need to be very structured in our questions and try to remove the bias as much as we can. But this is where I'm saying be very thoughtful during this process of just presenting very kindly and respectfully and enthusiastically and interested, because you want people working alongside you who are going to be positive and super interested and invested in the success of that team. And you don't have to
Yeah.
be super outgoing for what it's worth, but don't be an asshole, basically.
Yeah, I think the one caveat that I would add there too that I've seen it backfire is like if someone it changes their personality too much, and then like, like they're overly nice or they're just like very different to how they are usually. Um, there might be like some tensions or cultural misfits that manifest later that might make them maybe like less successful in the round later on. So I think that's also something to think about too, of like don't don't change too much, but just be like respectful and a decent human being. But at the same time, yeah, like I know there's some cultures that actually appreciate the directness or just being more blunt. So I think that's something that I would just keep in mind as well.
And
And
just real quick, maybe do send the thank you notes after your interviews that are custom to each person, just to put yourself a little bit over the edge in terms of your interest level.
yeah,
A question came in the chat that I have actually also seen recently with a couple candidates. So I'm glad Lee asked it, which is if a recruiter emails you after an interview asking, "Hey, like, how do you think that went?" What's happening? What should the candidate read between the lines? What's the intent or the intention with that email?
What's the intention of the candidate?
What's the intention of the
Oh, the
recruiter
recruiter.
asking the
Sorry, good.
candidate? So like let's say the recruiter the candidate like meets the hiring manager and like within 15 minutes they get an email that's like, "Hey,
Yeah.
like how did your conversation with blah 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 go today?" Like why are they asking that? What's the goal?
I think that there isn't a ton of thought going into the wording of that email, and it's more just a standard approach where it's like, hey, checking in, how'd it go? And at that point, if it's quickly after the interview is done, most likely they don't actually know themselves. How did it go? And they're legitimately just wanting to know where your head is and how you're feeling about it at that moment. Because if it did go well, they want to close you at the end. But I do think this is one moment where you do have an opportunity to reflect and say, hey, I really wish I had answered this question a little bit differently. Here's what I actually, now that I've had time to reflect.
Hmm. So is that a best practice? Like if you were telling a team how they should ideally run their interview process, would you actually recommend their recruiters check in with candidates after each round and ask them how they think it went?
100%.
Okay, so that's maybe a signal of a high performing recruiting team.
Yes.
Very cool. There's another question that came in. Um, what's your opinion on interviewing for a role where there's a hiring manager that is being hired at the same time? So they're hiring you and your upcoming boss in parallel.
Well, it's just a little bit scarier on your side because there's this big variable of who I think it would be your boss, right? In this scenario. Um, so I don't have much to say. Excuse me. I don't have much to say outside if that does happen. And those moments for you, if you are not the hiring manager, actually for both sides, it could be hard because if the hiring manager hasn't joined yet and they have different ideas for what that team could look like, there's a little bit of a risk that they maybe don't like the recent hire that was made and keep a close eye and have an exit for them. It's also just a risk on the IC's side of I don't know who my boss is going to be and if we get along. But I'll say it happens all the time. When I was building out the first sales team at Figma, we were interviewing both account executives and the head of sales at the same time. And you just hope that the company is being very thoughtful in their values, that hopefully the two people that you hire will be aligned.
Would your general advice to, like, if you're telling a CEO how to think about their hiring, would it generally be don't hire the manager and the person they'd be reporting in at the same exact time? Pick one and go with them first and then do the second?
Well, the reality is they're almost never going to accept the offer and start on the same day at the same time. The reality is that what they're doing there is plan A and plan B, where in most cases their preference is to hire the manager first to get their input. But the reality being sometimes they're more picky about that person who shapes the whole team and manages performance. And so that person might take longer to hire. And if the house is on fire, that could be an indicator that the house is on fire. And they know they need to scale out the team, they might simultaneously run both searches in hopes that they hire someone as soon as possible and then look at the second hire next. But yeah, I actually wouldn't necessarily advise against it, because the reality of business is, even though it would be nice to have this perfect roadmap, sometimes you just need to get going faster than that.
Yeah, that's such a good point about the house being on fire. And I think there's like in a scenario where the house being on fire might be a good thing. Like for example, like the company's growing super quickly, they don't know what to do with like the extra work, and they just need to grow really fast. And that's just like, the market is pulling you, and likely sign of a rocket ship. I think there's the other one where the company is just like running around in circles. Maybe they're not growing as fast, and they just kind of maybe like a
Maybe everyone just quit and they have to build out the whole team, like
totally. But that's yeah, but that's such a bad scenario, right? Because then he's like, I don't want to work at that company. Why did everyone quit, right?
it might be
So
good to know why that's happening.
yeah.
Just asking as a candidate, hey, may I ask what is the reason for opening
Mm,
this job and this other job? In a lot of cases, with startups, it's growth, or just a growing company, it's growth, and that's a good answer.
awesome.
Yeah. Okay, maybe last question I have, and then we can just wrap unless Mark, you have any other questions or another banger comes in the chat. Um, is is there any advice you have about just leveraging recruiters now in particular that is just like not was not true a year or two ago, given any recent evolutions in the market, AI, just like hiring trends, like things that are just like new or things that you're monitoring that are just like developing stories in your head on like how to coach candidates to think through?
Like, what's different now versus before for candidates or the
Yeah,
interview
like
in general?
is there anything we've talked about that you think like didn't used to be true, or anything that maybe is now true that we haven't talked about yet that didn't is something that Annalie from like a year ago would not have given as advice?
Yeah, I think that on the Super Insider podcast, there was a pretty interesting interview or chat you had with somebody that was talking about a trend in managers going into IC jobs. And I think that there is a recent trend in my view, there's a downsizing in tech with this AI development, where companies are hoping to be more efficient with less headcount and for each person to produce more output with AI. And as a result, also, you're seeing there's a little bit more reduction in hiring at the manager level versus the IC level due to just having smaller teams in general. And there's also some managers that are wanting to brush up their skills and really be in the weeds and learn the new technologies coming out, because they see themselves as more impactful as managers if they actually know what the new technologies are, not just people managers. And so I think that's a more recent trend. And if you're in the position of being a manager that's interviewing for IC jobs, you need to make sure that you have a very clear-cut answer for why you are doing this now that is believable.
Mm.
Yeah. Great. Well, this has been awesome. I hope the people listening found it just as useful. I'm sure a lot of them did. And we will send out an email with the links to Boulevard, all the things we plugged to those who attended the session. If you want to go deeper, as well as our LinkedIn's, follow us. And
I
yeah,
just want
we
to throw one thing out there. I'm on
please.
maternity leave. The only calls I've done is this call and the one with you guys 2 weeks ago. So I may forward you to a manager to help you out in the next couple months, but I will be fully back online in January.
Yes, very important to call that out. And congratulations again on growing your family. It's amazing. Cool. Well, thank you, Annalie. Thanks, Mark. And we'll talk soon. Bye bye, everybody.
Yes, you guys
Thank
have
you
a
so
good week.
much.
Bye.
Bye.